Hello and welcome to CS Week Marketplace webinar series. This series offers fresh perspectives and strategies presented monthly by knowledge specialists from the Conference 40 Platinum and Gold sponsors. I'm Lisa Collins of CS Week, your moderator today. We'd like to mark your calendars for CS Week and Conference 41 to be held May 22nd, 26, 2017 at the Fort Worth Convention Center in Fort Worth, Texas. Watch your email and our social media channels for registration information later this fall. This program will be recorded and available for playback along with our other archive presentations later this afternoon. You will find it by selecting Marketplace under the Webinars drop-down menu from the CS Week homepage. Attendees are encouraged to upload questions to the Q&A panel as they arise. However, we will hold them all to the end of the presentation for the Q&A segment. Please ensure that you address your questions to all panelists so that we may all see them. Today's webinar is Where New Customer Contact Preferences and the Legacy Utilities CIS Collide. Welcome to our webinar sponsor, TNG Consulting, and thank you for joining us today. At this time, I'll hand it over to Vanessa.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Edmonds, and I'm a partner at TNG Consulting, and I lead our research practice, which is called RIM Solutions, and our corporate marketing. I'm going to give you a brief introduction of our company and our speakers today, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. So TNG Consulting, for those of you who are not familiar, delivers on business goals through best fit technologies and services. We've conducted more than 400 projects for over 250 utilities since 1992. We do this through advisory services, client-side delivery support, and research services. The advisory and client-side services are for utilities. And for those of you who don't know, when I say client-side delivery, this is when we augment utility staff during implementations when there are not enough resources on the utility side. Our research services, newly launched membership, is research for both utilities and vendors. All researchers are industry veterans. It's one of the things that really sets us apart. Our consultants add to the depth of our studies. Our studies are bolstered through TNG's robust database called Insight. It has facts and figures from client engagement. So if you're interested in more on the research, we have contact information at the end of the presentation. You can take a look and inquire into that. Next slide. I want to introduce today's presenters. The first is Alec O'Brien. He's a vice president for TNG Consulting, and Alec serves as a lead on some of our biggest and most complex projects. He has more than 20 years of experience with customer information and billing solutions within many vertical markets, but 13 specifically in the utility industry. He offers his clients extensive experience in business requirement definition, solution design, change management, business process analysis, and project management. He's led application assessment, project quality assurance, and software selection efforts at several investor-owned utilities ranging in size from $750,000 to $7.4 million. And as a side, as you'll find out today, Alec is an excellent speaker, and we're really happy to have him on today's call. Our other speaker is Mark Hall. He's our Director of Research and Strategy for TNG Consulting. I actually had the pleasure of working with Mark at Chartwell several years ago, and he does excellent work. He brings more than a decade of experience working with utility and energy companies. He's led research efforts that have helped utilities improve business processes, make more prudent financial decisions, and increase customer satisfaction. One thing that's very unique about Mark is he decided to really, step into the trenches, and he worked as a software implementation expert for several utilities, and that's really bolstered his knowledge that lends to the research that he produces. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Hall.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much, Vanessa, for that great introduction. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak with everybody today. And before I forget, just want to wish everybody a happy fall. And hopefully we'll see temperatures start to drop a little bit. It's been very hot in Atlanta for me. The agenda today is Vanessa's already gone over introductions and introduced TNG and Alec and I. I'm going to speak to some key learning objectives of things that you can expect to hear today in the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about customer experience and customer expectations. And then I'm going to share some consumer and utility research. And then Alec's going to speak to some legacy CIS obstacles He's going to talk a little bit about different generations of CIS, and then he's going to discuss augment or replacement strategies, and then we'll go on to next steps at the conclusion of the presentation. So key learning outcomes today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding modern customer expectations and preferences, and I'm going to walk you through some exciting research that we recently completed with U.S. consumers. And then, as I said, Alec's going to talk about some obstacles, pros and cons of augmenting or implementing a new CIS as it pertains to customer channels. So with that, first, a little bit of humor. We can't have a discussion about the customer experience without the obligatory reference to poor experiences that we've all had, especially on the phone. Personally, I may be most companies' worst nightmare. I am inherently impatient, and sometimes I feel I can get the best results just by picking up the phone and talking to another human. And I may or may not be on a first-name basis with some of the people who provide my health insurance. I'm sure there's others like me out there, and they try to plan around those people. So just some expectations on the modern customer. So based on the research I've conducted recently, I created what I believe is a composite of the modern customer. And this, by the way, spans multiple demographics, including age, which will bear out as I go through some of the results in subsequent slides. But generally, customers of today want a personalized experience with many options, but with customer policies that are flexible and situational. For example, every time I call USAA, my bank, they immediately greet me by my military rank and name, as they know I'm an Army captain in the National Guard. And they have the software to associate my phone number to my account. And speaking of USAA, they have incredible digital channels, including a mobile application that allows me to deposit checks and even get pre-approved for a home loan. And when I do speak to a person there, once they have stroked my ego a little bit and made me feel like I'm the only customer, their CSRs may be some of the most knowledgeable and well-trained I've ever spoken with. And sometimes if they're a fellow veteran, they will share a personal story or two, and that really just personalizes the experience. Another example, I recently took a neat vacation to the beautiful state of Oregon to hike Mount Hood, and ordered some gear from an outdoor retailer called backcountry.com. 5 minutes after placing my order, Sam, a very friendly customer service associate, called me to discuss my order. He politely introduced himself and then asked me if I was gearing up for anything special, and I told him what I was doing and where I was going. And it turned out he had actually lived and worked in Portland for several years as a ski instructor and even recommended some trails. And one I actually ended up hiking. So it was an amazing customer experience. And a few days after I got back from the trip, he emailed me asking me about the trip. So I have to say I'm having a hard time justifying spending any more of my money at REI after the great customer experience that I had. And then finally, just as an example of kind of what I'm talking about is I've been a T-Mobile customer before it was T-Mobile. A few years ago, they called me just out of the blue to ensure that I was doing okay and to check in to see why I hadn't called into their call center in 3 years. And then they apologized and told me that I could have been saving money on a different plan. And then they asked me, how can we make this up to you? And I said, just count me an iPhone 6, and it was done. And finally, I guess as my colleague Jim Hendershot recently pointed out, customers, especially millennials, believe everything is negotiable and will often brag amongst themselves about deals they've worked with CSRs. And I'll talk a little bit more about millennials in a minute. So the digital customer. One of the things that I've been observing is just recently I saw that ACSI introduced their latest energy CSAT ratings, and they said that the ratings are down for this past year, about minus 3.2% for energy utilities. And that sort of got me to thinking, I looked at the energy costs and pulled some EIA data, and came to the conclusion that adjusted for inflation, electricity is relatively the same price as it was 20 years ago in 1996, which is about $12.70 per kWh. So you know that the price of energy is about the same as it was 20 years ago. We haven't seen any massive storms in the last couple of years since the East Coast got hit pretty bad, and generally the economy is doing better. So why are utility CSAT scores down? And this is just my theory, but I think customers are expecting a similar user experience offered by other industries. And just some of the some other secondary data that I found through other research studies. So 75% of Americans are using mobile devices now to access the internet. 21% of millennials only use the mobile platforms to access the internet. And believe it or not, consumers age 55 years or older are the fastest growing segment to adopt smart devices. Speaking of social media, 65% of American adults regularly use social media now. 90% of young adults use social media, and also surprisingly, 35% of seniors 65 and older use social networking sites, and that's the fastest growing segment. So I'm going to discuss some of the consumer research that we recently conducted. This presentation reflects about 2,500 U.S. consumers that we surveyed, and we'll cover questions we asked about regarding channel preferences, current channel uses, outage notification preferences, budget billing awareness, utility SAT motivators, and then I'll reveal the results of the utility survey we recently conducted before turning over to Alec. So for preferred channels, we asked consumers their preferred communications channels for their contact with their utility companies. Overall, close to half said that they prefer phone communication over other forms. And some of the more visible trends that we're able to draw out from this are older customers, boomers, your older generation Xers, generally prefer phone communication more than your younger counterparts. But I say by exception because there was an interesting slant to this regarding millennials, and I'll share that in the next slide. And no surprise to most on this call, but younger people prefer mobile sites and older customers prefer desktop sites. Anecdotally, just myself being a younger Xer, I guess, I've noticed that over the years, my preference has switched from desktop to mobile. Offerings have improved, and you heard me mention USA earlier. I've almost flied Delta exclusively, and its mobile experience in recent years has vastly improved, and I find myself using the desktop site less and less. Generation Xers are split. Younger Xers, like me, love our social media, while older Xers don't. An interesting trend, females significantly prefer online chat versus males do. And I don't know if any utilities on there have seen similar results, but I just thought that was some interesting trends that were coming out from preferred channels when you're just talking about overall communication with utilities. All right, so I spoke a little bit about millennials, and millennials, the whole topic of millennials has become very fascinating. Younger millennials are being defined as those aged between 18 and 24, and then older ones aged 25 to 34. So millennials are our large generation compared to X, and they're also overtaking all other age groups as the largest employable demographic. They are also tagged with being the most digitally adept group of customers. But some more of the apparent trends that I saw, I guess one of the biggest ones is, millennials are in love with their phones, but not in the way that you think. In fact, that I discovered that more than half of younger millennials prefer to communicate with their utility providers via the phone. And initially, I thought this was through text channels, but then I found research produced by some of the telecom mobile industry firms that showed millennials, in fact, are among the most prolific users of phones for voice calls. And more than 3/4 make at least one phone call per day. And younger millennials actually beat out all demographics, and older millennials were somewhere in the middle as far as showing preferences for phone. And I suspect that older you go on the millennial spectrum, the propensity for using phones for voice calls decreases. By the way, Generation Xers showed the lowest preference for phones. All right, moving to the next slide. So we also wanted to be able to contrast preferences for what channels are currently being utilized by utility customers so we can better understand and describe the trends. And as you can see on the slide, phones are by far the largest channels, followed by websites of varying degrees. To say the least, some cross-tabs analysis bore some interesting trends that I would not have predicted because it didn't necessarily agree with the data that I captured for preferences. For example, millennials overall, the biggest users of desktop websites. Older millennials, that's the ones that are aged 25 to 34, and early generation Xers like me are the biggest users of mobile websites. Millennials are among the lowest voice call users, but significantly lower within the margin of error. And I know that online chat is still only a sporadic offering in the industry, but where it is offered, millennials are the biggest users, as they are the biggest social media users. And finally, 45 to 50-year-olds and millennials are the most likely to walk into a utility office, which I definitely found interesting. I think I have a couple of theories that relate to that, and I think maybe because more of the people in those age groups are living in urbanized centers and are foregoing driving for walking. So the next slide, per the recommendation of one of my colleagues, Brent Cassing, I did a study on customer preferences related to outages because Brent thought the results would look different related to outages specifically, and he was right. Overall, text messages is by far the most preferred channel for customers to receive information about outages. But instead of data trends, I think I would kind of want to offer some industry trends and recommendations based on some discussions I've had with Brent and based on a report that he wrote. So talking to some of my colleagues here, they say that many of the legacy CIS struggle to adapt to texting customers en masse because when those systems were designed, text messaging was either non-existent or it was still in its infancy, which is interesting to think that, you know, even 20 years ago, text messaging was actually happening. I don't know if everyone is aware, but the FCC in August lifted restrictions on texting during major outage events. Before, they were restricted by the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. And then also, just it's worth mentioning, but no two territories are alike. So while the data from more than 500 Americans may show general trends, one area, state, or region may have different preferences for how they receive information. On customer satisfaction, Vanessa was actually the mastermind behind this study, and we wanted to know what would drive customer satisfaction. The twist to this question in this study was that we didn't actually give customers any options. This is all open-ended. We wanted them to tell us in their own words. And what we found was that more than half said the same or similar things, like they want to pay lower bills, which surprises nobody. But again, I did some secondary research, made some calls, talked to some people within the industry, and then read some other studies authored by companies other than us and found some of the following trends. So one, high bills make customers nervous, and when they get nervous, they call their utilities. Increased call volumes ultimately can cost utilities money. Mid-cycle billing alerts are an effective way to increase CSAT and alleviate some of that anxiety, especially when paired with some call for action that gives them means to lower their bills. I had one discussion where it was related to me that if there's no call to action, you give customers just a little bit of information by telling them that their bill is going to be more, then you're actually going to cause them to call into the call center, which is what you're not trying to do. You're trying to deflect that call. So once we found out that customers wanted lower bills, we wanted to know how they prefer to receive information about their bills, including reasons for price changes and information to lower those bills. And so we asked them, how would you prefer to receive information about your utility bill, including reasons for price changes and ways to lower it? And the 500 consumers that we spoke to said that email and bill inserts were basically a virtual statistic tie based in their preference, which was about 30 to 32%. And what's interesting is that there were some significant gender different preferences well outside the margin of error among men and women. Women, by almost a 20% difference over men, prefer paper bill inserts over emails. And then the split between men and women was about 15%, where 15% more men preferred emails over bill inserts. And my favorite group, millennials, prefer emails and text over other channels. And then finally, boomers and later generation Xers prefer paper bill inserts and phone calls. So we're starting to switch gears, and I'm going to be segueing more into the CIS discussion. And I've talked a lot about customer preferences for various ways that they touch their utility company, and I think it's important to discuss those things as we move onto the utility side to see how they are managing those preferences. within their key enterprise software solutions, including the CIS. And as Alec will discuss, there are various strategies for managing those within and outside of the CIS. And that being the case, I wanted to gauge what strategies utilities are employing to support modern-day customer contact requirements within their CISs. And what I found was most utilities have recently replaced or will be replacing a CIS within the next few years. That's an interesting result because it is the third TNG survey in the last year and a half that has shown that nearly a quarter of utilities are thinking about replacing soon. The other result that I wanted to mention, and I'll let Alec go into more detail on this in a minute, but about 70% are still in a wait-and-see approach, which I believe they are still seeing what the industry will offer in terms of solutions. You know, there's a lot of stuff changing right now. And a lot of the solutions have made some great improvements in adjusting to, you know, the whole customer discussion. And so with that, I think it's the perfect time to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Alec O'Brien.
Well, you're very kind, Mark. I very much appreciate it, and thank you for everybody that's attending today and interested in what we have to say. Mark, if you wouldn't mind going back to the last slide for just a second. The cool thing is when research, real analytical research lines up with what we're seeing anecdotally in the marketplace, and this is exactly what we're seeing right now. Our utility clients here at TNG, many of them have replaced, but a lot of them are looking to engage us to do a procurement to replace, or they're looking for us to do a study in should we replace now or a little bit later, and if we were to replace now or in the relative near term, what would be the cost impact, what would be the cost versus benefits. So everything you showed there on slide 21 is dead on to what we're right now seeing in the marketplace from an anecdotal perspective. Mark, if you wouldn't mind hit the next slide, that'd be great. Just a little perspective. I bet you most of you on the call, there's some of this that you're familiar with, or if it's the case that you're a utility, all we're doing is confirming that it's the case across all utilities. When have we seen great spurts of effort? Definitely in the 90s, there was a lot of move away from non-Y2K compliant systems. Again, much more of a account focus as opposed to a premise focus. We're looking to especially have systems that would accommodate large utilities. And again, there was the effort to try to get off the mainframe maybe on some of the ones that were produced in the 90s, although there was still a lot of mainframe being used in the 90s, and also then trying to spin up client server. Well, boom, fast forward, 20 plus years, these systems that were put in the 90s are reaching their 20, 25 year horizon. And what are all the different things wrong? Well, there was no distributed generation back then. There was no concept of customer web self-service. The rate structures may be different, especially in some fields too, like although electric rates may not have changed complexity that much, we're now seeing very complex rates and other things like water utility billing rates. We've seen demand response being introduced, and we've seen actually it being very successful in kind of decreasing energy demand. Smart grid, AMI, getting now for the average residential home, getting 15 meter reads if we want them. So again, the entire landscape just changed, and what that has done is only increase the amount of requirements we have for our CIS systems. Problem is in flexibility. The problem is in can you take a chassis that was built in 1990 and make it work in 2015 to 2020, and I think that's the challenge. What we're looking for is a greater need to pivot, or as we say on the slide, a greater need for flexibility. So, Mark, if you wouldn't mind, flip to the next slide. What we're a lot of what we've kind of positioned this webinar to be is okay, you've got a legacy system. Are you going to bolt things on, or are you going to look to replacement? What are kind of the pros and cons for each? And again, as you know, those of you that are still working with legacy systems, these are things that you're very familiar with. I can't easily, with a legacy system, add a new field. So if I have 2 phone number fields and I want to add a third, that's not easy at all. It's difficult as heck. let alone a Twitter handle, let alone an email address or a second email address, or as a special, as an SMS phone number as opposed to a landline phone number. Being able to not only having those fields, but being able to pull in that data, being able to handle also then the analytics related to how customers are talking to me or talking to the utility. A great thing that we see right now is bullets 3 and 4, this whole idea of multi-channel, this whole idea of how can I in a single place have a contact that came from the web in web self-service. Actually, maybe this person, we know their Twitter handle and they maybe tweeted something negative about a bill error that they got on their bill. A phone call that they made to the call center. How can, if that call is coming in now and this person has engaged us in maybe 3 or 4 different channels, how can all of that be visible to a CSR so we can go, oh, I know you're calling, I'm guessing you're calling about this high bill complaint and I have your bill up already, and kind of make the customer feel that we're listening, number one, and make the customer and have a call with a lower average handle time. Those are all the obstacles that we're facing with the legacy systems as they are structured right now. The next slide that we have speaks to basically something we saw 2 slides ago. So what's the difference between the 90s and today? The difference between the 90s and today is where we were Generation 1 systems, 2 systems, and now Generation 3 systems. What you're seeing actively marketed in the space, or what we've called, and I've been, as far as I'm concerned, what we've called maybe for the last 10 years, Generation 3 systems, although there are new and newer versions of them all the time. That first Generation 1 was, it was one that was premise-based. All we cared about was 1, 2, 3, 4 Jones Street. And it was homegrown. Each utility had their own. There was no commonality. There was no room for kind of best practice, and we had huge development staffs. Moved into the Generation 2, and we talked in a couple slides ago about the trying to get off the mainframe. Several of Generation 2 systems actually were developed on mainframe platforms because they were stable. But either way, again, there was very little there was very little flexibility for these systems. We didn't have good ways to handle interval billing necessarily. We didn't have good ways to handle the analytics or even approach analytics, just to even basic reporting. Complex billing, distributed generation, all that stuff, it was not included. A lot of that because it wasn't around. And what we ended up doing, though, is even for those systems that were based on a common starting place, see great differentiation as in-house CIS development teams took all these applications into different paths. So you might start off with the same, either maybe a customer one type system or something that was CIS based. But if 2 utility people meet at a conference, you'll find out that your systems are dramatically different. And that's really what we're seeing then change starting maybe 10 plus years ago as we went into the 3rd generation systems. Configurability, off-the-shelf systems that are that come from a software vendor who is really trying to take the application forward and by definition driving industry standard business processes through. Much more configurable, much less reliant on opening up a COBOL or some other type of program and changing a parameter and recompiling the system. I can go into a table, I can go into a screen and just make changes from there. The story that we hear is few modifications, although we all know of cases of Generation 3 systems where people wanted to make the new system look exactly like the legacy system and did a lot of modifications. But again, what we're looking at is, again, trying to get more industry standard, utilizing system integrators as opposed to companies that only focus on the product, and try to get as much pre-built in the software and pre-built integrations for us to, again, stay away from the risk that we saw in the Gen 1 and Gen 2 systems of modifying our systems so much that we back ourselves into some kind of design corner. So as we move on to the next slide, really what we're looking at this point is this argument that we've talked about before is, are you going to augment and continue to bolt on, or are we going to replace? Again, I'll refer to the gentleman that Mark referred to earlier in our call, one of our colleagues, Brent Cassing, who's spent a lot of time in that kind of customer-facing space. There are applications can be bolted on. We've seen one of the major software providers go in and purchase one of the kind of off-the-shelf customer engagement type applications. So augmenting is as much of an argument, as much of a valid option as replacing. But things that you're going to have to look at moving forward is, again, on the resourcing, drivers, and the competing interests. Resourcing has a lot to do with, do you want to continue to have a large team of in-house developers, or are you looking at relying on a product company to move the product forward and then making the decision kind of accept in a vanilla manner the enhancements that would be coming through from that vendor? How much do we want our system to be either customizable or at least flexible? And do you have in there the quote-unquote, as it says in the slides here, the modern customer functionality? Mark talked a little bit earlier about customer expectations. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But, I mean, it seems like every utility that I'm going on site with and my colleagues are on site, is we keep hearing words like Amazon. Our customers are expecting the functionality from our regulated utilities and municipal utilities that big companies like Amazon are presenting. But unfortunately, our cost models and our revenue models are very different from what Amazon can present. So we're being held to the same standard, but with a totally different revenue environment. So, but that's at least one place we could look to, both augmentation and replacement. Drivers, what do executives want? And the investor-owned space, what do our shareholders want? What do our customers want when it comes to options? And, what kind of business pressures we're on would obviously drive these decisions. And again, in the investor-owned space, very much what is the capital spending? Are we over on capital spending? Are we under? Is it a great time as we look at our capital budgets to potentially put in, again, a new asset, which would be CIS? And how does a CIS implementation fit into all the other IT changes we're making right now? So, again, we're not trying to necessarily answer those, but answering those questions in your specific case is going to help you determine whether you might be in a position to replace, or are you still going to want to augment around the edges of the system that you have right now. Mark, if you wouldn't mind forwarding over to the next slide. Thank you. If you were to talk about keeping your existing systems and moving on toward and then bolting on, if you will, or augmenting, which is a much nicer sounding term, to your current system, there are a few pros to that, and one pro is this: that as we, as an independent company, look at the CIS software providers, we still see cases where they're still looking at how to do certain things. Providing, again, a full suite of customer engagement capabilities. There are lots of firms still that are in the marketplace right now that are offering these augmentation systems that can sit in front of a legacy application and do great things, whether it's outage communication or kind of high bill messaging, high usage messaging out to customers. That one can accommodate and do accommodate existing systems right now. The big platforms are pulling those in, again, as you're aware of by following the industry. One of the large software providers did just recently buy one of the kind of custom bolt-on providers, and part of that, I think, was a recognition that they wanted to have that level of functionality in their core product, and they'll be working over the next several months to import that into their core product. But again, it's also customer engagement. It's, our legacy CISs have been fantastic in generating bills, sending bills out the door, but again, in a world of distributed generation, of demand response, of making sure we communicate from an outage perspective, we need something that engages our customer far more than what we have allowed to. Been recently in the last few weeks at a few utilities, and several of them didn't have a space for an email address, or had a space for only one email address, or only had 2 phone numbers that were available, on a primary and a secondary phone number. Well, if you look at all the people in my family, if you look to our home phone line, plus my wife and my 2 kids and I each have cell phones, well, that's 5 different phones for just our family. Most of the systems aren't in a position to do that. The number one thread we're hearing right now, which Augmentation can help with, is customer preference. How do I want to be contacted? Mark walked you through difference between maybe what millennials might want versus somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s when it came to how to get in contact with them. For my mother-in-law probably wants maybe an outbound phone call. I'm fine with an email. Some of my younger colleagues, if it's not delivered to, as Mark said, if it's not delivered to them as a message on their phone, they don't even want to see it. So again, these preferences are key, and our legacy systems just aren't in a position to handle these preferences. And so thank goodness for the bolt-ons that can do this, and for the large commercial off-the-shelf systems that are beginning and how to incorporate customer engagement, customer experience, CRM into their core products. And again, the other thing too is not only how do I want to receive, but can you communicate differently? Is the communication that you're going to send to my 81-year-old mother-in-law, is it the same things that you would send to my about-to-be 18-year-old kids? And are what we're going to send to our corporate clients the same type of bill messages that we might send to our residential customers? All that stuff is huge. So there is, without a doubt, for those that need to keep a legacy system or are trying to continue to avoid the risk of replacement, applications one can bolt on to definitely address these customer engagement issues. Mark, if you wouldn't mind going to our replacement side. Again, the replacement is really the flip side of this. What we're looking for, and sometimes the bolt-ons can't do, is going across our entire enterprise and taking all the different contacts that we have and putting them in one place for, let's say, a CSR2C. Talked about earlier, what if I tweeted about the fact that I had a high bill and was angry about it, and I went on the website to research it? Wouldn't it be good for then the call center employee, if I do finally call, to be able to see that, I maybe made a public complaint and that I was also looking at my last several bills? Whereas we can establish external customer preference and customer information modules that are external to the core system by bringing it into the core system. That information is available to everybody. It's available to the rep. It's available that might be on the phone. It's available to our credit collections infrastructure. So if we're sending outbound dunning messages or so, that we can then do that on a customer choice basis and send that to the customer's preference channel, which might be different from a high bill message as opposed to a credit collection message. What we're looking for, especially in these commercial off-the-shelf, that we don't get with the legacy, is the flexibility, is an architecture that would allow us to go out and make changes, to basically come up with new fields on the fly, and also take advantage of the commercial off-the-shelf provider, continuing to push new functionality down to us that we don't have to design, our developers don't have to maintain, and is thought to be, best in class in the industry. Preference Center embedded in the application, being able to now evolve as our customer channels grow. I mean, text messaging was something that I knew about years ago, but there was a point there wasn't a Twitter. Now there's a thing called Twitter handles. So what are we going to face in the next 10 years that we're not familiar with right now? Replacing with the commercial off-the-shelf is at least going to allow us to maybe only be just a few years behind of what the cool kids are doing vis-a-vis communication, customer engagement paths. And we would expect to see then the applications, kind of build that in. And so as we upgrade our applications, the new functionality would be occurring, would be inherent in the application moving forward. And again, what new contact channels that we can't think of right now might be out there, from a Google Hangouts or a FaceTime or whatever. What are we going to have to pivot and be able to adopt? The idea is, if we were to replace that commercial off-the-shelf functionality, as long as we're keeping the updates, would allow us to move forward and take advantage of this. So Mark, let me turn this back to you or Vanessa, whoever would like to talk about kind of next steps.
Okay. Well, I'll thank you very much, Alec, and I'll go ahead and handle this. But so just a little bit about some of the stuff that TMG has at our disposal. If you're wanting to learn more about our services, you can email us at info@tngconsulting.com. Some of the research that I actually presented on today is going to be compiled into a more, basically into a more in-depth report. U.S. consumers weigh in on the digital utility customer, and that's going to look at some of the data with some deeper analysis. And that will be available on our research portal within our website for our members. And if you want more information, you can also email us at research@tngconsulting.com. And we've also, a lot of the stuff that I presented on is reflected in publications that we've recently added to our growing library. And if you want to know more just about what's going on with TMG, we did recently change up our newsletter to make it a much more easier to consume one-page newsletter, which is TMG Trending, and that can be found at our main website. So with that, I guess we're going to move into Q&A. And did you guys want to give some direction to the participants of how to do Q&A, or I guess we can just go right into it. So the first question that I'm seeing right now is the question asks, are utilities interested in a true cloud CIS offering in a software as a service model? And if so, which utility segments are most interested in this? And I'll start off with that question. So we actually, TMG, we did a research study back in earlier this year. It was actually supported by Vertex, and it was we asked the question about specifically about hosted cloud-based CIS. We didn't ask specifically, about SaaS or infrastructure as a service or any of that stuff, but we did ask utilities, kind of to gauge their how they felt about various aspects of the cloud. And a couple of things that it did reveal is that when we asked utilities, well, will cloud, how do you feel about the statement cloud will help our utility quickly and efficiently add new features and scale as needed? Majority, over close to 50%, agreed with that statement. And as far as just kind of the breakdown, we did see that there was interest, among a lot of the different utilities. We saw more overt interest, I think, among some of the smaller municipal segment. However, anecdotally, I know that some of the people at TNG, speaking to some executives at IOUs, have said that there's a lot more interest in that. And Alec, I don't know if you've experienced this in any of your conversations, but I certainly have. It's become more prevalent in conversations I've had with people in all aspects of utilities.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the number one question that we're getting from the utilities that we're working with, especially those that haven't made a huge investment or replacement yet. It's all about the timing related to what's available from a cloud perspective and when will that be available. Both of the very, very large systems are investigating cloud. I've actually was lucky enough to see two very recent proposals within the last few months that it was for both CRM functionality or customer relationship management functionality and core, customer information system functionality. the options that are out there that especially relate to cloud computing are huge. It presents a huge question to the utility base about, do you want that amount of customer utility information in the cloud? There would be many that would argue that sometimes these cloud providers can actually have a more secure system than any one individual utility could. But it definitely presents an interesting new set of paradigms is how we're going to do billing. Are we going to do some of our billing in utility systems, or are we going to do some of the billing in actually a cloud? And what does that do to our capital spending versus our O&M spending when it comes to cloud computing, because it's mostly done on a subscription basis. But, and what if I hold off for a year? Is the cloud going to become that much better that I'm going to have a different platform if I don't do nothing or don't do anything for the next year? So I don't know if it's fair to say what utility segments are most interested. I think because of also separate systems that could be bolted on, like Salesforce or so, we're definitely seeing this. The marketing staff have an interest, the economic development people having an interest, those that market directly to commercial industrial customers have more of an interest because there's much more sales call, and so there's the concept of leads and bringing leads to deals and so on. So I think you're definitely seeing that from the marketing side. And the other thing too that cloud or software as a service seems to line up with also is these new products and services, is have an ability to sell different things than just standard the utility commodities that utilities have historically sold. Maybe getting back to a model of what we used to of selling things like appliances or so. And how do we build them, and how do we track leads? How do we track someone that's not our customer yet and actually maybe outside of our footprint, but we want to be able to sell the service to that has nothing necessarily to do with regulated or municipal utility service. So again, to the question, I think that's really what's driving the thought of cloud, but it's also creating some difficulties in that since cloud is out there, a lot of utilities have taken a kind of a wait-and-see approach and are not necessarily moving forward with the thought that a year from now, the landscape could be totally different.
Alec, a follow-on question to the cloud discussion was in reference to the whole augmentation versus, I guess, upgrade or argument or conversation we've been having is introducing the cloud to that. Will that kind of change that paradigm? Because if the cloud system obviously can be much more easily upgraded as time goes by, does that kind of affect how we look at that?
Yes and no, but I would say it's dramatic, because I would argue in talking to somebody like a CIO or somebody in IT, especially in more IT leadership than anything else, I think 5 years ago to maybe 1 year ago, we were hearing we don't want to do it. It's not as secure. We'd lose customer information. And we're not interested in, we want it to be done our way, not some kind of industry best practice way. And the weirdest thing is to see this massive pivot in the last year or two to CIO saying we would rather this be in the cloud, because again, the security onus changes from the utility to a third-party company. We would rather take as something that we're seeing like in a Gmail or an Office 365 where I'm getting updates all the time. I want to center on constantly updated industry best practice, if you will, processes. So we've seen a major shift, at least in the IT organizations, as to their approach to the cloud. I don't know yet if we're seeing that on the business side, but certainly in a lot of utilities, the IT leadership are becoming much more interested in how they can actually leverage cloud to keep the business process fresh and to kind of actually turn over the security issue to people that are very well versed in it.
Thanks, Alec. Next question, and I'll address this one, but the question asks, what do you think of utility customer loyalty programs, and can it be considered the next step of engagement? I guess from just some of the research that I've been doing recently and some of the things I've looked at, I mean, I certainly think it's something that's become a lot more prevalent, as we see with a lot of rewards programs, whether you're going to pick up pet food at Petco or I think of basically the Starbucks thing, and I know that it's become a lot more prevalent in the retail industry, and it's almost like a badge of honor with some of the speaking of millennials, some of the millennials that I do know, they really kind of value how much they can earn and some of the deals they can get. I certainly think I certainly think there's probably some creative steps that utilities can use with some of that stuff, especially maybe if we're talking about energy efficiency and conservation and that type of thing. But I guess time will tell if it's the next step of engagement. I know that gamification was a really big thing a couple of years ago. But yeah, I think anytime you can find new and innovative ways to reach out to customers, especially some of the younger crowd, I don't think, as long as it's a well thought out plan, I think it can be pretty healthy.
And it's funny, and maybe it shows the difference between, Mark, you being maybe at least 20 years younger than me, but I started working with a particular utility at the beginning of this year, and they talked about customer loyalty programs, and I giggled because I thought they were joking, and they weren't. And the idea being is our customers use loyalty programs, not just when it comes to airlines, but when it comes to ordering things online, buying gasoline, that there's almost an expectation of loyalty programs. Plus, in the space where utilities are going to be competing, especially over the next 5-10 years, in ancillary services that someone could buy from anybody, whether it's their regulated utility or municipal utility or some other thing, some other entity, we're going to want to incent them to quote unquote stay with us. And so customer loyalty programs, again, even as late as, some portions last year had not heard much demand for it, but in the last year heard a huge amount of demand for that. And again, that presents the same issues for any utility and might speak to needing a more flexible system to be able to, how do you calculate customer loyalty points? Do you get more points for using more energy? Do you get more points for consuming more water? Maybe you get more points for actually being more energy efficient. And can any one of our systems then be able to track that, incrementally build that, and then have a way for our customers to redeem those points if it is something like an airline frequent flyer type thing? Well, these are all things that I think are being envisioned by multiple parties that provide software in this space, but provides a huge challenge to someone that has a legacy system that could never even begin to calculate this stuff. Do you build one in-house, or do you go out and get one? So in answer to this question, we are hearing more and more about this, and I think as our expectations are no longer being driven solely by our industry, but our customers' expectations are being driven by industries other than the utility industry. Customer loyalty programs are something that we're going to have to account for, and we're going to have to find some software that will actually help us do that, whether it's bolt-on or a portion of the commercial off-the-shelf software that's out there.
Thank you very much, Alec. Yeah, thank you very much, Alec, and thank you very much, everybody in the audience today. We appreciate your time, and I hope you found the information useful. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to CS Week.
Well, thank you, everyone. Alec, Mark, Vanessa, it was a really interesting and valuable presentation, and we were glad you're here to share it with us. We're nearing the top of the hour, so we are going to be respectful of our attendees' time and conclude promptly. But I would just like to say, if you have additional questions, there was some contact information available. If you like, also you can reach out to Amber Weens, and she can facilitate a question and a meeting that way for you. And at this point, we'll go ahead and, were there any final remarks that our speakers wanted to make before we conclude? Vanessa, Alec, Mark?
Lisa, this is Alec. Just again, thank you everybody for being on the call. These are exciting times, watching this market change. So it's kind of neat to be a part of that and to track it. And again, it's very interesting to see this market mature, and we're very glad to be a part of it and to share information about it.
Yeah, and this is Vanessa. Just one final thought. Again, thank you, just as Alex said, for attending the call. We had an excellent turnout today. You know, it shows what an important topic this is. And as Mark mentioned, in October, he's going to be releasing a detailed research report on this. So it's, you know, including what's in the webinar, but it goes much deeper. And if you'd like to get on a list to be notified when that's available, please email us at research@tngconsulting.com, and we will get in contact with you about that report.
Thank you, and I suppose that will wind out our webinar for today. And attendees, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your continued interest and support of CS Week.